Welcome back, Adrian, my favorite fractional CFO. I feel like you should be running peak. Sometimes you're so overqualified with all your multiple exits in KPMG and Price Waterhouse and investment banking and PE experience.
Pleasure to be here again. So thanks for having me.
So, as everyone knows, this is our sloppy version of Burn the Blueprint, where we're way more casual. I'm introducing you to the team, but we're kind of taking on some topics that we're seeing out there in the PE and family office space. And it's a lot less pretty than what you're going to get from Tony and Bridget on the other side of our Burn the Blueprint
Hey, come on.
leadership. Yeah. I didn't mean to say that you're not pretty. You're very pretty. But Tony Franklin is our master podcaster. He's award winning and he does the leadership podcast with Burn on the other side. But this is our messy version. This is Colleen's version where I get to talk to just the real people that get done out there, really. And you're one of them. So thanks.
You're locked in to Burn the Blueprint podcast, where Tony Tidbit and Dr. Bridget Cooper challenge outdated rules and build smarter ways to lead. If you're ready for courage, clarity, and real talk, you're in the right place. All right, team, what blueprint are we burning today?
Hey, I want to talk, Adrian, today about acquisitions. There are so many strategic acquisitions happening right now. 2026, I feel like there is this mad rush to get to June, at least here in California. There is an election year. It's been a year of uncertainty. 2025, 2026 has started off just as uncertain and maybe more uncertain as 2025. But what we're seeing is acquisitions like there is money out there being spent to get these companies in, and sometimes it might be a little too fast. So let's talk about that. What do you think?
Oh, I saw some statistics. Something like 76% of acquisitions fail. Now, how they define failure, I've no idea. From past experience, yeah, it's a challenging time.
So let's talk. I'm going to just start off with the really big question that's going to piss a lot of people off. What are the mistakes that those deal teams are making? Let's talk about some of the things that we're seeing. No names, please. But what do we see?
I think there's a real challenge in an acquisition process. You've often got a company that's been acquired. They deliver their forecast on which evaluation and an offer is going to be based, and they're often understandably optimistic on those forecasts where, they want to get the highest amount of money possible. The acquiring company then holds them to those forecasts. So you have a period pre-close where the company is demonstrating its value. You've got a team that often have to elevate themselves, work really hard. They go through this process, and seeing it firsthand, I've been incredibly impressed by teams when they do this and they deliver. They get to the close, they deliver on that forecast that they put forward. Everyone's happy, everyone celebrates. The challenge then is that they've set a precedent now moving forward. The acquiring company understands, says, well, I want value out of this business. Here are the forecasts. We've got to continue the journey. Often what's happened in that process is they have broken a lot of the standard operating procedures. They've tested their existing controls to the absolute maximum. And there's an element of burnout. And then there's this huge pressure to operationally build the business, to change the business and to move it forward. Yet what we've got is we've potentially got two conflicting visions of business, potentially two conflicting cultures of people in both entities. What are we doing? Are we taking over a business and just adapting it into how we operate? Or are we assimilating two businesses together to try and optimize and get the best from both? What's the plan? And often the plan is pretty minimal, or it's set with limited information. You're talking about an acquiring business that's only done due diligence, which is often mitigating risk more than anything, and their understanding of the operational and the cultural side of the business is limited. So getting back to your question, the biggest problem I see is that there's too much speed to operationally change an acquisition company and too little focus on actually setting up the guardrails from a financial perspective of monitoring what's successful, what's unsuccessful, how are we defining that, what's the genuine period that we can achieve this, what is the ultimate vision, what's the goal. And that's not just a number of revenue or profit margin, it's actually what are we trying to achieve.
It's interesting because, and we were talking about this earlier, that we've seen some companies that have, in some offices, that have gone in and said, hey, listen, we want to acquire this company. this makes strategic sense for us to acquire this company because we want this X, this box within that company of what they deliver to them or what they'll deliver to us. And that box comes at a pretty steep cost. It's got a full team. It's got a full infrastructure. We're not happy with the team. We're acquiring not the team, but we're acquiring this process. And I think sometimes in those situations where we're so eager to get one element of what that company offers, we forget that there's probably 20 other companies that have the same thing, but better. Yeah. And it goes back to your rush to acquisition that we're seeing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's another piece of it too. I think the integration of that new company into your existing company. And I'd love to hear kind of your take on systems and how do you integrate the finance from one into another, and what are the foibles that you're seeing there or things that you can avoid in that space?
Yeah, I think stage one is you've got to be able to measure and rely on the data that you've got. And so stage one is diagnosing, okay, what are we paying for? Is it accurate? Can I rely on this information? And typically there's a reasonable understanding of that going into things, but again, it's a very superficial understanding because it's just been driven by, the due diligence process. And so it's typically, P&Ls. It's not really going into standard operating procedure. You can tell how well a business is run literally by how long it's taken them to close month end. If it's taken them 20 days, 30 days or longer, there are issues at stake. So you can ask them very simplistic questions from day one, which are almost yes or no answers, which can highlight some of the areas that a company, particularly if it's a smaller company, understandably doesn't have the same structure that a larger organization may have. But it's really just about understanding straight away what's the information I can rely on, what's the outcome we're trying to look for? Taking the step back to make sure it's the right outcome based on the business. Often some of these smaller businesses have created something pretty special and unique, and that's what you actually want to keep. That's the piece you want to basically expand maybe into the bigger operation. And so there's a rush to get to a result without truly making sure it's the right result for the combined group.
We had a situation. It's interesting that you brought up due diligence. I know that you're probably aware of a situation that we had where we went to clean up after a poor due diligence. Due diligence was done. I think they charged $35,000 per business. They acquired over 20 businesses, and about 80% of those due diligences missed so many issues in the back office, so many hidden issues. When they started acquiring these companies in pretty rapid order, we were actually brought in because they had complete chaos. So we needed to right the ship and put some project management teams in place to just really make sure that we got everybody back on the right accounting. We kind of unearthed the stuff that had been hidden during acquisition, because that's what you do, right? I mean, you go pre-acquisition readiness by nature is setting this company up to look good for a private equity firm. They know, like any company that goes in and does pre-acquisition readiness, they know what those deal makers are looking for. They have a pretty rote kind of strategy that they go after. So it's been really, really interesting to see the quality of due diligence. And I know that you and Gershon really take this due diligence to the next level, but you could pay anywhere from $25,000 to $400,000 for due diligence. I guess, yeah. I just challenge companies to really look at what you're getting for that and what you're looking at. So if you had to guide the due diligence process into 3 key things that you would not want them to miss. I think I'm hearing some of them already, but I'm kind of curious.
Yeah, I think there's not enough focus on typically, broadly speaking, there's not enough focus on the operation of the business. It drives everything and it highlights everything. You lose so much from if I talk about revenue, it's the vanity line. My company turns over X million per annum. It's not real. Cash is king and is the element that really matters. Not even profit. Profit doesn't necessarily translate to cash. How many times have you got businesses where they're thinking they're making profit, but the cash flow is going down and down and down? So the challenge is, I think, on a due diligence, there is a restriction in terms of what information is available, how accessible is it? And that really highlights the risk around an acquisition that you have to understand. And I think it's glossed over because it's very easy looking on a product basis rather than just straight revenue. What's the profitability of clients? What's the profitability of individual SKUs and so on? That's the insight you need to get to, because most businesses have loss-making products or they have loss-making clients that they're over-servicing. That obviously highlights scope creep potentially, which is an operational challenge that they've got to fix. You have to get into the real detail. The challenge is often that detail is not readily available. I mean, we talked last time about AI, but those are the types of tools now that we've got access to, that you can very quickly start assessing data en masse and at least exploring. But stage one is, what have we actually got here? Where are the big holes? Where are the challenges this business is actually facing? What would I typically expect? And where am I getting alarm bells? And that at least then guides you as to, hey, this is risky in this area, and we have to do more work specifically to here. As often I mean, how many checklists have you seen? Let's just tick the boxes. We've done this, we've done that, we've done that. Very little of it is focusing on actually how a business operates, the cash flow, all the way through the business, and how that transitions from one department to the other.
Post-acquisition, you go in, you're brand new. Your CFO, what is the very first thing you look for or look at?
I look at the culture's the hidden one, and it really is. You've got a burned out team that just bust a gut on getting to a point where they can sell at the agreed amount because they've hit that target in the last 3 months. You've got a leadership team in the target that have probably learned an awful lot about the business and problems within it. You've got a due diligence process where you've got this false knowledge, I feel, sometimes.
Ooh, fighting words.
Or an elevated understanding of a business that's not true. There's not enough substance in the understanding of the business. So the things I look at are where I typically expect to see the holes, which is that profitability per product or per service. It's what's really interesting. If you look at the cash flow cycle, post-acquisition, pre-acquisition, they're trying to get as much cash into this business as possible. Everyone's working incredibly hard. Post-acquisition, it starts moving to the more standard timeline, if you like, that it was previously, and sometimes getting worse. So again, what I'm looking for is whether you're seeing a change in the cash cycle of the underlying business, and then how people are reacting, how they are. I'm always really interested on the acquiring business and how they are, it's not treating, but how they are working with the new team. What's the relationship there, and have they truly taken into account the adoption of a culture or the integration of a culture into their own? Are there potential conflicts there? If people aren't aligned with a true vision and a goal of trying to achieve, then rarely is it going to work.
We're seeing that we do a lot of strat planning after acquisition, right? I mean, you know that, but we are actually narrowing our scope to offer 2 different steps to that, because it really is about the people and what is happening. And really a lot of the reason why I started Peak, I mean, we started to see, like back in about 2017, 2018, we started to see all these companies going for acquisition. And then once they did that, there was this almost stop of production after they were acquired. Like the sales team stopped selling. The motor stopped running. There was this waiting period with teams. There was this uncertainty, this fear that took over. And then your typical company is going to come in and say, okay, let's get sharper. Let's drive operational efficiency. Let's go percent. Now let's put some new eyes in there. And how are we going to get to this new goal that you guys promised me in your forecasting and scalability messaging, right? And all of a sudden there's this widespread panic, and many times the CEO has stepped out now and is only in an advisory role, or they've lost key people that have not gone through that acquisition, and they're in flux. And the team it's almost like the machine just needs a little oil to get going again. Well, I guess that's an old reference, right? Because no oil in a Tesla, but
it's true. You've got to have the dashboard that's monitoring how the machine is functioning, and often that's missing because the business didn't have it in the first place. Everyone's rushing to change the operations of the business, maybe potentially force them into their standard approach because they feel it's the best way. And No one's monitoring that. There isn't any data to show, is it successful? Is it working? What does success look like? How have we defined success? Over what period? What are the point where we need to be discussed? They're just flying blind. And, then you've got the people in the business who understand their business or feel they understand it, who are getting more and more frustrated. I've talked to so many CEOs who have gone through an acquisition, they've stayed with the business, and they're literally, this group's destroying my company, and they just don't get it.
We hear that a lot.
That mismatch and it, again, we've talked about it before, having a clear vision, having a journey of what we're trying to achieve, how we're going to do it, having the culture, who's accountable, how are we measuring this, what are we doing to get the end result? Again, and I think there's a real danger in any acquisition to just look at a result and be idealistic. What are the points where if something doesn't quite work, what's the impact in that end result? That type of planning is just imperative when you're talking about spending hard cash, on an opportunity.
If I had a magic wand, I would, we have our in-house systems team. The first thing that I would do before any acquisition hires, especially if it's a strategic acquisition, I would build a dashboard with every KPI. And then every acquisition, immediately I would just have that data piped in. So you always knew exactly what you're looking for. It's probably one of the biggest challenges we see, systems, different ERPs. We have one company, huge company, spent 14 hours a week with one guy and a bunch of Excel spreadsheets, just trying to figure out how much money they made last week, right? And you would be shocked how big this company is that we're working with. And so there's this moment where you have to, my perfect world is building that dashboard so everyone sees everything, that the most important stuff is there. And I think one of the values of what we do, not that I want to separate them with that team, but when we go and learn about the team first, and we get inside that company and we work with the closest to that customer, because we know if we understand what has gotten them success and what they're most proud of, it's easier to bring them along with you to go where you want to get. And I know that you do that within a finance team and a leadership team as well. Last question. Biggest surprise that you have seen, or the maybe most common surprise, unexpected, that people are, give me a shock. Shock me, Adrian. What is the biggest surprise to hear?
I think understanding of valuation is always the biggest shock I have.
Really?
I think we've, and it's a terrible thing. I think I'm being a theoretical snob when I talk about valuation.
I've heard that about you.
I own it as best I can. But I think on valuation, we've often simplified things, and it's more around companies that may be looking to sell, etc. We talk about multiples all the time, and so multiples have become this driving force in valuation. It's like, well, the multiple for a marketing organization is X, and for manufacturing, it's Y, and at this size, it's... And I find it frustrating because I think it can be really misleading. I think multiples are an output of a valuation. That's all they are. They don't drive valuation. They're simply an output. Mm-hmm. There are means of simplifying something in a way that you can look for some relationship. If you actually look at the valuations of businesses and you actually looked at their true multiples, they're massively different. And the assumptions that someone's taking on when they apply a valuation are so restrictive that there's a real danger, I feel, always of just being misled in terms of what the evaluation is. And I talk to companies, particularly in the SaaS side, and revenue is the multiple for SaaS. You say, well, why is that? And they don't really know. Well, it just is. And, so I'm timesing my revenue by this amount. And, with the SaaS business, it's growing so rapidly and it has such a different cost base, right, that the reason we tend to use revenue as this multiple is because the EBITDA changes so drastically over a short period, it becomes a nonsense to use that as a multiple. So the lack of caring to truly understand what drives a business's value is risk and future cash flow. It's as simple as that. And that's what you have to focus on as a business. And so the trouble with the multiples is if it's revenue, it's a SaaS business, they start focusing on revenue and they forget about the things that are truly going to drive the risk of that purchase down. A strong management team, the structure that you're working with a leadership team that have demonstrated that they can react and build the business, and following a really good framework like EOS, those types of things are what, from a buyer perspective, really impress them and start valuing the leadership team far more, which can have a massive impact on multiple. So yeah, valuation.
Yeah, SaaS is tricky for me too, and I just, not because I'm reading the most recent Wall Street Journal or Forbes magazine, but SaaS is tricky too because it's in an ever evolving model, right? So it could be irrelevant in a year because somebody has just done it better, bigger, different. AI has, I mean, we are growing so fast that I feel like you have to look at that runway into the unknown because you don't know what everybody else is developing. I couldn't tell you how many times I get a phone call saying, "Hey, Colleen, do you know any investors? This is a business. We found this business. This is the greatest thing I've ever heard of. Nobody else is doing this in the world." Meanwhile, 3 other people have called me and said, "Hey, listen, about the exact same business," right? Because you don't know. Nobody's parading it. You're kind of doing it. You're in stealth mode when you're building these things up. But truthfully, you're not the first person with an idea. So you're at risk of somebody doing it better all the time and quickly.
You are, but you can mitigate that. Again, that just comes to risks, doesn't it, at the end of the day? And you can change your entire business model. I was talking to a SaaS business, and they're in agentic AI, and they were trying to build a consumer product. And trying to build a consumer product. I challenged the whole business model. I said, well, if you do that, you're marketing directly to consumers. You're building from literally zero to something, and you're competing with some of the largest organizations down the world and with tons of cash. What about looking at one element of what you're offering? They had a unique way of delivering their product. And I said, that's the real value. What about now partnering with an existing client base? So you're completely right. You've got to take back, but it's risk. How do I mitigate this risk? Am I even selling the right product? Am I pricing it the right way? Pricing's another thing, we're talking about where things get wrong. Pricing's the most powerful tool and lever that we have in business. It's the least used. Everyone's scared to use it. And rarely have they actually followed a proper pricing strategy to get there. They're simply, well, so-and-so charges this, so-and-so charges that. We want to be here in the market, so we've priced it at this, and it's insane. It's the most powerful mechanism we've got in business, and it's so underused.
This is where we get messy because we get a little bit off script, but I will tell you. But I will tell you, one of the things, like during my, we do a lot in the life science space. And generally an investor who invests in the life science space wants to know that somebody has 3 or 4 products coming out every single year. I mean, that's important, right? That backline, what's the word I'm looking for? But that backflow of innovation that's constantly coming up and bubbling over. So you're constantly evolving and growing and cutting edge. And I feel like it's been amazing, some of the acquisitions that I've seen in that SaaS space that don't have that culture of innovation and what's new, because you're a glance away from being irrelevant. I think in this, that we're moving fast.
Increasingly now. Yeah, you can. I mean, the cost now of development is so small. It's requiring a whole different skill set. And the challenge is now. I think more is going to be focusing on the business model of not just what you're building, but how you are commercializing it in the market. How can you create those moats around your product that it doesn't matter that 10 people come up with the same idea and build it, but they literally cannot compete with you. And it's therefore being creative and commercial in terms of how you apply your ideas.
Do you have a perfect number as a CFO of how much money you would invest in innovation in any company? Where does research innovation come in for you? Did I stump the great Adrian do it?
I think one is going to vary a lot, but 2, I think you've got so many dynamic elements that are, you can innovate now. I don't think the factor is money anymore, because you can now have expertise applied to innovation. You can brainstorm with an agent with huge knowledge and at least clarify your ideas, which can be hugely powerful. I think time is now. Individual time, I think for innovation to work, you've got to elevate people so they're not dragged into the weeds, the true brains within your organization. And it's how you capitalize on those ideas. So time, I think, is going to be the biggest constraint. I've worked with organizations and some insanely bright people with really cutting edge ideas. and they're literally so far ahead of the pack and their team, they often struggle to convey that knowledge down and therefore scale it. And all that knowledge is captured in one person's head. Now we've got the technology that we can monitor, we can assess, we can follow how that person's thinking, and we can model it. And you can extract that information and then ask it to be put in, dumbed down for the likes of people like me that I do actually understand it. And so you've got all these tools now that can assist on innovation. And
so you know what this is? This is a typical operator CFO argument, right? The operator says, no, Adrian, we need to spend more money on innovation. You're like, you don't need to spend any money anymore. We're
just better use the tools available to us.
All right, rock, paper, scissors for 20% research budget now. I just stepped back in time 10, 15 years. Thank you, my friend. I appreciate it. This is a great conversation. I think it gave people a lot to think about around acquisitions and really looking at them with a new lens. So thank you.
Thank you.